welcome back to the I'm Book podcast. And I'm here with Kim Stewart, who is with Book Marketing Mania. She is amazing. I was just on her podcast, and she is now here with us to talk about book marketing and podcasting and all those great things. So it's so cool to have you here now as a guest on my show. Welcome to the I'm Book podcast.
Thanks, April. Yeah, this is so fun.
So if you haven't checked out the Book Marketing Mania podcast, be sure to hop on over there and listen to our interview there where we were talking a little bit about O'Leary Publishing. But I want to talk today about podcasting and your expertise on growing an author audience through podcasting.
hmm
How did you get started doing this for authors?
Oh gosh. Well, probably about 10 years ago, I felt the call, which is, I can't believe I say this to you, April, a publisher. I felt the call to write a book. And I went to my first writing conference and just soaked it all up and got back home and just, kind of started blogging, but it never really took off with me to really write. I think I was just stubborn probably too, but I just didn't really feel it. And so I went back the second year thinking, okay, now I'm going to really get more serious about this. And I really felt at that conference, I was in this amazing marketing workshop. And I really felt God just kind of laid it on my heart that, look, I brought you here to learn the aspects of marketing and publishing and all those things. So I have a marketing background, but it's corporate marketing. And so I really felt
Wow.
him say, hey, all these authors, they can write, they love to write, they hate to market, versus
Yes.
you seem to not like writing, but you love marketing for anybody. So I just really felt that was my calling at that time. And so I kind of put the book aside and just started helping authors with their marketing. And back then, as you know, it was so much easier, like social, you just kind of posted whatever, memes and pictures and, you did your emails and you did your blog, but it wasn't as different today with all the video. But authors with lots of different marketing tasks with their, email marketing, social media marketing, and PR. And that was back when I worked a lot with a lot of traditional publishers and traditional published authors. And that was before really we had the big boom of self-publishing and everything just
Right.
amazing. Like it's so much easier now and hybrid and things like that. But just through the years, I've just done different things for authors and I got kind of more solidified into PR. Really love that aspect of it. And then within that, I really love just podcasting. So I started my own podcast and have helped authors start their own shows as well as be a guest on shows. And so I just really feel like that little niche is just for me. I just love, I love reading books. So I love working with authors and I love podcasting. So that's kind of in a nutshell, kind of a long nutshell of how I got here.
I love it. Well, it's interesting how you say like you thought you were going to be an author. And so you went to
Uh-huh.
a writer's conference and then another door opened for you. And
Mhm.
I feel like that when you are in the space of wanting to be helpful and just willing to, you were obviously willing to buy a ticket and show up at this conference. And then you got something totally different out of the experience than you
Mhm.
thought. And here you are 10 years later. So it's really incredible to me that you were able to pivot in what you thought you were there for versus what you
Mhm.
were really there for. So
Mhm.
congratulations on that. So when you said you were working with traditional publishers and traditional authors in the beginning, what did that look like? How did you get started marketing yourself to do that for authors?
Yeah, I really started at that conference, just meeting. I had I knew some of the speakers that were authors. I mean, I didn't know them, but I knew them online because I followed them. I had read their books, loved everything that they talked about. So I thought, well, this is like a perfect match, right? I want to go learn about being an author and I'm getting to learn from my favorite authors as well. So that was like a match made in heaven in my mind. And so a girlfriend of mine and I actually had gone together and she has beautiful graphic talents and stuff. And so we just started asking people and getting to know them in person and just saying, is there anything we can do to support you? Like we want to champion your message. And we'd been on some launch teams. So we kind of knew more about that. And so we just started asking people, and they were, everybody, authors, they want all the help they can get because they don't want to do that marketing piece. And we, of
Right.
course, loved it. And so we just started helping authors, and then they started recommending us to their publishers. And so then the publishers would just start reaching out to us and saying, hey, I've got this book coming out with this author. Can you help them, with book launches? And we'd get in there and we'd be like, oh, well, we're all over the marketing plan. We just loved all of it. And so it was so fun. So we did that for so long. And again, this was before really there was so much help today with self-publishing and hybrid publishing. And that's probably what scared me in my own. Like, back then it was just like you had to have this huge, I mean, you still have to have a huge following and community to get a traditional publishing contract. And there just wasn't really any other options then. But yeah, so we
Right.
spent several years supporting traditionally published authors and just loved it. And then kind of, went off in different directions. But yeah, that's kind of how we just started. It's really just asking. I mean, I think that's the beauty of a lot of
Yeah.
people want to help their favorite authors. And so I think it's just so nice just to reach out to see if there's anything you can do to support them. And if you have any skills to offer, they'll be so thankful for that.
That's so good. So tell me, I'll ask you both sides of the coin here. Give
Uh-huh.
me, if you could, a story of total success, someone that you onboarded as a client and you put together a marketing or PR plan for them and they just embraced it and it just totally worked. And then I'll ask you like
Yeah.
what's something, and you don't have to name the person or the book.
Uh-huh.
You can keep
Yeah.
that anonymous, but just to show some of the things, because there's not I feel like marketing and PR and all of that, there's no like A plus B equals C.
Mhm.
A lot of it is organic. It's figuring out when you're planting the seeds and where they're sprouting, and the commitment probably from the author. Like
Mhm.
you can't do all of the heavy lifting. They have to participate as well.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
always encourage our authors that you can partner with people, but you are your message.
Mhm.
So I'd love to hear like a success story of something you did that just really worked and something that you thought would work that just totally didn't work.
Yeah, I would say one that well, I don't know, this is probably just a general bucket, excuse me, not just like any specific one author,
That can be
but
like a general.
back then when I used to do a lot more book launches, a big thing was doing like online book studies. So, they would like kind of like an online book club. And there for a while, those were super popular and very successful. And so we did several of those that went really well because the author was so invested in it. I mean, it was, we kind of organized it and kind of championed the people, but it was like they really wanted to show up and see the author. And I think probably the most successful, even one of those, was when it was a Bible study and the
Mhm.
author was very well known as, someone to go to for a Bible study and learn about biblical principles from her and dig into God's word. And I think her online study was probably the most successful because of that, because, that she'd already kind of built that up and her following,
Yeah.
people knew her for that. So it was like, oh, now we're going to dig into this book of the Bible together. And so that was super fun. And something we added on to that was super fun too. And again, this has been several years ago. So this might be like
Yeah.
more the
Uh-huh.
norm. But we had I think it was a Zoom call even. It may have just been a conference call, if it was on Zoom, but it was like, one Sunday night or some evening, and everybody on the launch team showed up. And this was a launch team thing. And everybody showed up, but they got that personal interaction with her. And it was very personal, prayer time and asking questions and getting to see, I guess it was on Zoom because we got to see each other's faces. But I say that was super successful. And I don't know if those are as successful anymore. I think people get really excited about something like that, a book club, and then they don't
Yeah.
follow through. Oh, we're just all so busy. And I guess I'd probably say that's probably the same thing for what we thought would work. Like we tried to do some of those after that fact, and it was like it didn't work as well. And I don't know if it was because it was the tide was turning and people weren't as excited about it. I also think in that instance that it didn't work is I think the author was kind of like sitting back a little bit because she had so many things to do. And it was like, y'all just take this and run with it. And I think the missing component there was the interaction with the author wasn't as heavy
Yes.
as the other one had been. So I
Yes.
know, today, especially because we do get to see our favorite authors on video and social, and you can communicate with them and you feel like even if it's somebody on their team, you still feel like you're hearing from your favorite author. And so I think everybody wants that really personal connection.
I agree. And it is true. I love that you said that. Really, what I'm hearing you say is it's not necessarily the strategy in
Mhm.
some cases. Like whether it's a Zoom, like we do a Zoom book launch, for example,
Uh-huh.
with our O'Leary Publishing authors. And we've had our Zoom room maxed out with a few
Uh-huh.
of our authors, and we've had other authors that have had maybe 20 people on.
Mhm. Yeah.
And it's like, what's the difference? The strategy is the same, but it's
Uh-huh.
how many people already support and know and love that author,
Yes.
and how committed is the author to inviting people to come? Because I
Mhm.
think it's both and it can be very revealing to get to a book launch and then
Mhm.
see that only 20 people showed up, for example, because it's like I'm not saying that as it's bad. It's just
Uh-huh.
like there's a lot more work to be done to grow.
Uh-huh.
It's a good litmus test of where you're starting. So,
Yeah.
and the fact that you said that the one author who was doing the Bible study, she already was kind of known for that. She already had a
Mhm.
following for that. So if we're talking about podcasting and, hosting a podcast, if an author wants to do that to build their author platform while they're writing their book or maybe launching their book, how
Mhm.
how can they do that? And how do you think that hosting a podcast, maybe in tandem with having a book, can help you grow your audience?
Yeah, I think just because I really encourage people to do it, long before your book launch, and I get a lot of pushback on that, which I understand, and I think people are also like they're afraid. I don't want to put this content on my podcast that's going to be in my book because if they hear it on a podcast, they're not going to read the book. And as an avid reader, I can tell you that it's not true. I mean, it was the
Yeah.
same way with blogging, like where we came from. I could read
Mhm.
blogs, but if it was in a book form, I'm still going to buy the book.
How does an author use a podcast to grow their platform? Like, how do you recommend they use that podcast?
Yeah.
Because you can have a podcast and have nobody listening to it.
Yes.
Just like
Yes.
you
Very
could write
true.
a book and have nobody buying it. So,
Yeah.
how do you recommend somebody who's either written a book already and
Hmm.
now they want to start a podcast, or maybe they're
Hmm.
thinking about a book and maybe a podcast is a good first step to sort of
Hmm.
build their audience? How would they go about that?
Yeah, I would say if they are working on building the book, I would definitely take, the topic of the book and make that be the topic of, kind of the general topic of your podcast. And I think as niche down as you can be these days is going to be so much better for you because there may be other, books that are being written or there may be other books on the shelf. You've probably already done that research, right? You know what's out there, but you definitely bring a specific angle to it. And I'm sure you coach a lot of your authors on this. Just, you have a specific voice and you have a specific experience you're bringing to the table. And I think if you can make your podcast reflect that, so maybe it's something you've never talked about online before or, written about on a blog or anything. And I think you have to start somewhere and just kind of be known for that topic because we do have so many, books in front of us nowadays, podcasts in front of us. You just want to really niche down, I think, to show this is where I kind of stand out in the market. I'm talking about this, this one little piece of this big puzzle that we go through. And so I think that's why I think you can't start it early enough. I mean, time just flies by. And I'd recommended to an author that's going to publish next fall. We worked together several months ago, and I was like, you really need to start talking about your book content. It just takes people a while to really grasp this. And it was going to be a little bit different than what our current podcast was about. So I think making sure your content's in alignment so that people, you can start sharing it with people because I don't think it's an automatic, as you know, April, it's not just an automatic start a podcast and you have this big audience. It just doesn't happen that way. But if you can, really champion your listeners around a cause, around a topic, and then you can start talking about it on social or in your email list or your blog or, guesting on other podcasts is a huge thing, right? If you can just carry that same message forward, then you're going to start building a community of listeners and a community of future book buyers. They're going to get excited, but they have to kind of be warmed up. We always hear about this, know, like, and trust factor. And I think that's, a podcast does a great job of that, of just kind of building that up and building up that anticipation and really getting to know you as somebody that's going to solve, XYZ problem. And I think it's the same thing. Like if you've already have a book on the shelf and you're trying to think of new ways to market it, I think again, a podcast can be that. And I mean, I don't know, April, with yours, if you've kind of played around with the format or not, but that's what I love about podcasting is it's your show. You can make it however you want to. And so it could be just about that book and only a certain number of episodes and you're done. And it's just this marketing collateral that's out there and, you can just keep promoting it over and over. So yeah, whether you're writing your book or you've already written it and you're trying to figure out how to market, I just think podcasting is a fantastic way to get your message out.
I agree. And speaking of, the format, and that's something I was going to ask you next. So you set me up perfectly for the question,
Oh,
which
good.
is, how do you choose your podcast format? Like for the I'm Booked
Mhm.
podcast, for example, I have guests on the show, and some episodes I just do on my own.
Mhm.
And so I haven't made it this rigid format. I kind of whatever I feel like doing is what I do, like you said.
Yeah.
So, do you recommend that an author choose from the beginning? Like, I'm going to do a limited run podcast. I'm going to commit to 10 episodes. They're going to be about the 10 chapters of my forthcoming book or the
Mhm.
10 chapters about the book I already bought, I already wrote, for example. And it's going to be just me.
Mhm.
So it feels doable? Or do you say, just get the first episode up and invite a guest on?
Mhm.
What do you say to get someone sort of over the hurdle to
Yeah.
starting?
Yeah, and I think, when you were a guest on my podcast, you said this, April, you talked about, when you start working with authors and you really have to figure out first what the goal of their book is. And I think it's the same way. Like, what is the goal of the podcast and where does it fit in your marketing strategy? Because it could be, again, like if it's before, if they're just writing the book and building an audience, they may just want to do a set number of episodes, solo episodes, and kind of use it as a lead magnet. It's out there in the world, but you can, attach a lead magnet in your show notes and just really hone in on like one specific topic for a short number of episodes and just let it sit there. But you have to market it and get the word out. But you could go guest on podcasts and talk about your podcast, even though it's a set number of episodes, around a set topic. Another way I've recommended too, and I mean, I think it's super flexible and it depends on your timing. I mean, I've talked to a lot of authors that are just overwhelmed writing and editing mode with their book. And that's, they're swamped with that. And that's not something that's okay. Do that. That's a priority, right? But whenever your, time is available, look at a podcast again. You'll be so happy that you put that plan in place. But I was just thinking about too, like before, your book comes out, like maybe you're thinking, okay, when my book comes out, and like a lot of people I talk to, they'll say, when my book comes out, I'll guest on podcast then. And that's why I say I think it's great that you have the opportunity to do that beforehand because you can talk about your book. You don't have to have the book in hand yet. It might be available for pre-order. It might not be. You're just trying to maybe get some, new listeners onto your email list so you can email them when the book comes out. And I think if you have something like if you're kind of in that stage and you're trying to, get the word out, but it's a little bit closer to your book launch, I always think about being super strategic. Like with us, we serve similar audiences. And so we're swapping here. And I tell authors, like, think about, when the time comes for you to be a guest, who are the podcasters that are serving your readers that you want to reach out to? You want to be able to serve them. Well, maybe ahead of time, you might want to extend an offer for them to be a guest on your podcast. And so you can, invite them on and you could talk about the topic of your book, right? And get their opinion, or their stories. I mean, there's so many ways to go about it. Like you were talking about on my show with your book, were at a mental health conference. And so that was applicable to them. And I'm thinking, gosh, you could have mental health professionals on your podcast, right? And that may be the case with your book too. But I think, really thinking ahead of how you're going to market your book and how can you maybe make that extend an offer today for them to be on your show and bring their expertise and then, swap when the time comes. So you could do like maybe that's all you're going to do is just do a couple of, a set number of interviews and it's around your topic of your book. So you can, I mean, I just love that it's so flexible. I mean, you can do a short-term podcast. You can say, you know what, I'm committing to this. I want to do it for the next year. I want to do weekly episodes. And then it just, you just have to look at what makes the most sense. I know a lot of authors like to do just interviews because it's kind of like you're building relationships that way. And I think that's awesome. If that it goes back to what you said, April, if that's your goal, it really depends on, what your goal of your podcast is. And then you want to set up your format to follow that.
Yeah, I love that. I found that one of the cool things about being an author or having a podcast is it gives you a chance to reach out to people who might not otherwise want to talk to you.
Mhm.
So, if you have a podcast and let's say there's an author that you've always wanted to talk to or interview or keynote speaker that you just think is fabulous and you saw their TED Talk or whatever,
Mhm.
it's great to be able to reach out to them and say, "Hey, I'd love to have you as a guest on my podcast. Would you be interested? It's only 30 minutes and we'll promote it,
Mhm.
whatever." Most people will give you 30 minutes
Mhm.
knowing that it's something you're recording that's going to be public and you're going to promote it. So it's not very much work on their end.
Yeah.
And then it gives you a chance to interview them, and
Mhm.
at least build a little bit of rapport with that person. So
Mhm.
it's a pretty neat door opener, I would say, to be a podcast host because you give
Mhm.
yourself that sort of carrot to give other people who can, possibly come on your podcast. So
Yeah.
so let's talk a little bit about what you do and how authors, who find you, whether they are in the process of writing their book or whether they're,
Mhm.
still thinking about writing a book or they've already published. At what point do you step into that picture and how do you help them? Like how would your ideal client work with you?
Yeah, so I do coaching for nonfiction authors, and it really depends on where they're at in their journey of deciding a podcast, either hosting a podcast or I want to go guest on podcast, either build my audience, build my email list, market my book if they have a book in hand. It just once they kind of have gotten to that point of, okay, I hear about this podcasting thing, I need to figure out if is it for me. And then they'll come and we'll usually do a strategy session first just to kind of figure out where they're at. And they've got lots of questions they want to get answered. And then, then we can work together from there forward. If they have decided, okay, I want to host a podcast, how do I get started? Or I want to go guest on podcast and how do I get started there too? And so, yeah, just kind of coach them through the process and share what I know and try to make it as easy as possible on them, because I know with authors, if you've written a book, you're anxious to get started on the next one. Or, if you're writing your first one, that's where your priority is. And so I really try to make it not be time consuming. But yeah, it just depends on when they're ready to take advantage of podcasting.
I love that. Well, what's the best way for someone to get in touch with you?
Yeah, they can reach out to me at my website, kimstewartmarketing.com, and they can see my services there or email me, kim@kimstewartmarketing.com. And I would love to see how I could support you, or I can definitely refer you to other people like April and other people in the industry if I'm not able to support you. I'm sure I know somebody who can.
That's amazing. Well, I am, as a publisher, seeing the excitement of a book launch and the authors achieving a number one new release status or
Mhm.
having a bunch of people on a Zoom launch or an in person launch. It's like this huge bubble of excitement. And then
Mhm.
afterwards, like you said, it's like, now what? And so if
Yeah.
you've written a book and you've launched a book, whether you've done that with O'Leary Publishing or another company, or you've done it on your own, and you're not finding the traction you want, maybe it is time to start a podcast. Maybe it's time to think about how am I going to reach out to new people. Maybe you've already, I'll say, burned through your warm market. Everybody's
Mhm.
already seen you post on Facebook and Instagram a million times about your book, and they've seen, they know it's there. They've either bought it or they haven't. The
Mhm.
goal of having a book then is to get beyond that warm market and meet new people. And that's how you'll be successful as an author. And having a
Yeah.
podcast is really a great way to do that. So I encourage you to reach out to Kim and give her a shot and see, schedule a consultation and see if she can help coach you to getting a podcast started. So thank you for your time to be on the show today. It's been great to talk to you.
Yeah, this was so fun, right, April? Thanks for having me.
You're welcome.